Hello, my name is Sean Wren, and I'm editor-in-chief and creator of The Bear Cave. I was lucky enough to sit and chat with managing director of Cinema Blend and author of the Release The Snyder Cut book, Sean O'Connell. We talked all things about the wonderful Snyder Cut, and if you want to pre-order the book, a link will be in the description below. If you're a comic book fan, movie lover, or DC fan, and interested in how a small group of fans became a movement, forcing a mega Hollywood studio to actually do something and get justice for director Zack Snyder, this is the book for you. Also, when you purchase the book, proceeds will go to American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. And without further ado, here's my chat with Sean O'Connell.
All right, game on. Ready when you are.
Right. You've probably talked about this multiple of times. How did the book come about?
The book came about because I couldn't shake the idea that whatever was happening with the Release the Snyder Cut movement was a story that deserved to be told. I'm a huge fan of comic book movies in general. I'm a huge fan of Marvel, and I really like what DC is trying to do, but I'm fascinated by both of those studios trying to mount their cinematic universes. And reporting on the story of Justice League for Cinema Blend, the website that I am the managing editor for, I mean, there were so many aspects of that story that were fascinating. The fact that they were building towards a Justice League movie, the fact that Zack Snyder had to step away from it for personal reasons, the fact that he got replaced by quote unquote the main guy at Marvel at the time. Like, Whedon was coming off of 2 Avengers movies, that they were bringing a Marvel guy over to complete a DC movie. Like, all of that was insanity, and then the movie ends up being as horrible as it was. My gut reaction as a casual fan was like, what went wrong here? Let's go through the multitude of things that went wrong. And then the more I kept seeing about the development of the Release the Snyder Cut movement and all the reasons why they were fighting for it, it just felt like a story that needed to be told.
So well, I was going to ask it later, but that leads to a point. When you were on, because you reported on set, and I read multiple set visits, and I think probably Cinema Blends as well.
Mm.
Did you, when you saw the film for the first time at a press screening or whatever, did you see things that you didn't see during the set visit? And like, well, when you saw it play out, you're like, well, that really didn't happen the way that it was shot back in 2016.
Yeah, so the story beats were all still kind of there. So the thing that we watched, the one scene that we watched them film when we were on set that day was Commissioner Gordon on the rooftop of the Gotham Police Department when Batman shows up with Wonder Woman and Flash. And there was a difference in how it played out, and we're probably going to see this in the Snyder Cut, where they were saying that parademons were taking key people. They were capturing or kidnapping key people, and they believed that there were like 8 scientists that had been abducted. And then Cyborg steps out from the side and he says, you can make it 9 now, because they just invaded Star Labs and they ended up taking my father as well too. So you knew that was going to play out that way. And so when I saw that scene play out in theatrical cut, I was like, oh, this isn't what happened, like that's not there. But Flash's line, like the comedic line about how they're all gone, that was there. We did see them filming that. So you could see that there were absolutely elements, that Zack had planned out that they were still putting into theatrical. And when we were on the set, Zack walked us through, he essentially had storyboarded the entire film, and we saw up until a point where he kind of like the third act, he kind of left off. All that stuff was still kind of there. It was like, they were still going to have the fight under Gotham Harbor. They were still going to, Bruce Wayne was going to go and try to recruit Arthur Curry. Like, those beats were still part of it. They just looked different. They felt different. They played different. It almost felt like if you took a classic film that you loved, but then like when you were growing up, you got the version that came to TV. Yeah. And they had to like censor it for mainstream kind of thing. And you're just like, oh, this feels wrong. Like, this is weird. It's even the times like when they get somebody to redo like swear words that they use in movies, and they use an alternate word. And when you hear it, it's jarring because you're like, oh, that's not right. That's not how it's supposed to be. And that theatrical cut totally feels that way. It just feels like it had been censored and reworked completely.
And I was just wondering, do you think the legacy of, I think actually both films, is that the sense of the theatrical cut will be played as similar to the Justice League animation, so that you can watch it with your kids, and then the Snyder Cut will be, right, you've watched that, but now this is how it actually was. If you like,
yeah, I think that that's a fair comparison. I also don't want to dismiss the theatrical cut completely, like to ignore like it doesn't exist. I think it's important for people to maintain the fact that it's there,
yeah,
because it needs to hold a place as saying like, this went so wrong, like so many people made so many bad decisions to lead to this. They really thought that that was going to be the moment that they pivoted successfully to a more audience-friendly, Marvel-esque, tone, and it backfired so completely in their face that I think you need to almost keep it as part of your collection for that reason alone. It's historic.
I think it's going to be like a subject in like film, like when people study film, like like this is how a studio film happens when you really don't have a vision at the end of it.
Right. Too much interference.
Yeah. One thing that caught my eye right away was in your author's notes, and you mentioned that you told a close number of friends. What was their first reaction when you said, I'm going to be writing a story about this?
They would get pretty heated right off the bat because I have so many colleagues who are in film journalism who subscribed to the notion that it doesn't exist, and there's many that subscribe to the notion that it's an entitled fan base that, just made a lot of noise kind of thing. And I would try to pretty quickly lower the temperature of that discussion to say, like, I know you don't think it exists, kind of, but you have to at least, I think journalists need to maintain an open mind at any given point, right? Like it's hard unless you have the full concrete facts in front of you. It's hard to say with 100% certainty one thing is one way or one thing is the other, positive or negative, So whenever everybody was like, the cut doesn't exist, like, why are you writing about it? It doesn't exist. I was like, well, how do you know that it doesn't exist? Like, there's a possibility that it does. And especially because Zach, along the entire way, never, he never confirmed that it doesn't exist in one way or the other. In fact, he did the exact opposite. But then I would say to those colleagues, like, hey, you are all like, we all get into film journalism because we are fans of film. Like there's very few people, I think, who are in film journalism who legitimately hate the medium. So I would say, can you guys just step back for a minute and think? And quite often I knew what their hot button topic was. And I'd say, like, well, what if somebody was exploring fill in the blank, and wouldn't you want to know more about the story? And then they'd be like, all right, yeah, I guess I'd want to hear more about that. And I was like, well, then you should probably stop and ask a couple of questions. And so, and I've shared a copy of the manuscript with a few of those folks who have been dead set against, or, just more on the, why are they releasing this thing? And the feedback I've gotten from them is, wow, you really humanized the idea of the movement for me. I didn't really understand the stories behind the people who fought this fight for as long as they did. To me, it just seemed like, noise on social media. When I think if you get beyond that, there's so much more to the story that to me felt like it needed to be spotlighted.
Yeah. And was there a surprise with you when you were creating the book about how much of a fan base Zach as just as a man has, and the global outreach because you talk to people in Chile, to Brazil, to Qatar. I haven't got through for the book so far, so I don't know if you speak to people in Britain and obviously in the States and
sure.
Brazil and stuff. Blown
away by how global his fan base is, and blown away by how truly moved and inspired they are by his work, to the point where, and you'll get to this point, like when I was writing the book, for the bulk of the time that I was working on the book, we didn't know that the Snyder Cut was going to get released. So I needed an ending and didn't know what the ending was going to be. And at one point I decided that, like, okay, well, this movement doesn't exist without Zach's fans. So let me give Zach's fans the last word in the book, and we'll get to a point where we essentially just say like, hey, if this movie ever does see the light of day, these are the people who fought really hard to make it happen. And so I put on social media, like, if you guys ever had a chance to send a message to Zach on the off chance that he's going to pick up this book, because if someone wrote a book about a project of mine, I would probably want to pick it up and read it. What message would you like to give to Zach? And I was overwhelmed by, I think I ended up with 150 or 160 some odd messages from fans from all over the globe. You know, like they just came in from everywhere, and they were so passionate and they were so authentic of just like, your films made a difference. Your films, you know, came along at a time when I really needed them. I'm a DC fan. They would say things like, I'm a DC fan. I've never thought I'd get to see my characters who I love, you know, personified this way. And no, I didn't stop to think about that to a certain extent. Although I have filmmakers who I adore, and I probably would turn around and send the same thing to them. But yeah, I was blown away by how far Zach's reach is.
And do you think I don't want to make it sound negative, but do you think your viewpoint changed on the director as well? Because I was looking back on things that you've written in the past, and there was an article there's a feature that you wrote in 2013 about if Man of Steel essentially ruined the DC universe. But then again, you were also one of the people that gave BVS a positive review.
Yeah.
So you think that you're like, even just during writing the book, you got an understanding of why people essentially Man.
Yeah. For sure. My opinion has changed on Zach, and it's weird because like going back, and I didn't even through the process think about what my relationship with him and his movies are, but I've been all over the board with him. Like, I loved Dawn of the Dead. I loved Watchmen. I loved 300. I thought all those were great. His Man of Steel, when it hit me, was so drastically different than what I thought I wanted that I didn't connect with it, you know, and it's taken me a long time to sort of come around to what I think he wanted to do. But that's great. I mean, I think a strong film should be open to a lot of different interpretation. And a film doesn't change, but you change, I think, you know, and you warm up to certain sides of the argument, and you can fall out of favor with a movie that you thought you loved. I've had plenty of movies that I adored when I first saw them, and then I go back to revisit them and I'm like, oh, this doesn't hold up the way that I thought it was going to. So I think it's fantastic that a movie that you can almost grow and mature and understand the point of view of a particular film. And I think with Zach's DCEU output in particular, it's hard to fully judge it until we see the full arc, because I do think each of them has fed into the other. Now, I don't necessarily think I think Zach was still in the time under the artifice of the studio was trying to get him to build a cinematic world. And I think a lot of the decisions that he made, you know, I'm sure he believed in them creatively, but I think a lot of them also stemmed from the fact that DC was saying to him, like, hurry up and catch up with Marvel. I think that you can't debate that fact, or I believe that that's what was happening. And so you get a Superman movie that, you know, very quickly goes into a Batman Superman movie that includes Wonder Woman, that includes, you know, Cyborg, Aquaman, Flash. They all have to be part of it because we're building to something bigger. And I think that's why this 4-hour cut of Justice League is going to be the purest and most unfiltered, you know, this is what Zach wants to do, because he doesn't even have to get it down to a manageable 2.5-hour runtime to go to theaters. It can be every big idea that he's ever had. And then once it drops, I think we'll be able to sort of step back and say, okay, now I get what the arc is. But even just like, if you think about it, when you watch Man of Steel now, and we know that, you know, Harry Lennox is playing Martian Manhunter, you view the film differently. And who knew any of that at the time? You know, like, I think it's a type of film that's meant to change in your prism. So, you know, listen, I stand by whatever I tweeted, you know, back in 2013, but it's just so funny that like 8 years later, I'm like, I don't remember what I tweeted last week. Yeah, but you said,
yeah,
I guess I did.
But it's amazing to think that when I clicked on the article, in 2 years' time, it'll be the 10th anniversary.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just, and you know, you see people a couple, occasionally coming out with like new takes on BVS, and that even that film is starting to mature more with audiences, which is amazing when you consider the hellfire that Twitter was when in 2016, where literally every article was about how crap it was.
Well, and it is like you say, I gave it a positive review, BVS, and that was even the theatrical cut of it. And then when I saw Ultimate Edition, I was like, oh, now I get it. Like that Ultimate Edition, honestly, is what clicked for me, where I was like, oh, now I really understand what Zack is trying to do. And so that's a big part of the reason why I was always kind of pro Snyder Cut release, because I was like, oh, if there was an alternate cut of BVS that made it that much different, then why wouldn't there be an alternate cut of Justice League that probably is more in line with what he wanted to tell? I didn't realize how drastically different it was going to be. But I believed that Zack always had a different version. And so, in the back of my mind, I kept it open, saying like, oh yeah, there's probably another version of it out there. I just didn't realize how to what extent that belief was going to take me.
Yeah. The other thing that I found amazing with the book is the fact that with the people that you talk about, a lot of it is down, and even Justice League as a project itself is all down to mental health.
Yeah.
How people were connecting to it in a mental state, because as I said to you, it's like I connected with Man of Steel because with my mental health, it humanized everything. Man of Steel was the reason why I love Superman. And you read these people's stories about how essentially a lot of people gave up on life until Zack came around, and then you have the awful things that happened in his personal life with Autumn. Do you think that's also a part of the fan base, is the fact that we found something that mentally that could be ours as well?
Absolutely. I mean, that is a huge reason why I connected with members of the movement, because who is anyone to turn around and say to any fan who connects with material for whatever reason that they're wrong? Like I'm a huge proponent of love what you love, and if it connects with you because of reasons that are personal to you, tremendous. That's what art should be. Art should be something that speaks to you. So when someone turns around, like it could be a movie that I despise, but if somebody turns around and says to me like, no, this works for me for this reason, then I'm like, more power to you. Like, that's great. Go out and find what you, and I believe that not just for film, although I think film is really significant for that. I believe that for music, I believe it for books, like entertainment and art from that perspective is meant to be an escape. It's meant to be a conversation, with the artist and the audience. It's meant to serve so many needs. And so when I heard people's stories about how they were in really bad places, but found a way to pull themselves out because of Zack's work, one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that I amplified their stories as much as I could is just so that Zack could hear that. Like how special must that be to him to hear that his films have made that difference? How I loved hearing from you that you felt really empowered that your story matched up with some other people. And I made a point of that in the book too, that there's people from around the globe who found commonality and unity in their love for Zack and his movies. Tremendous. Like if it helps to bring people in the movement together so they don't feel so alone, so they feel like they're part of a community, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I think the movement should be celebrated, because it builds people up, and not for the fact that they find reasons to argue on social media.
And do you think that I know the book is a celebration of fans, but do you think Zack Snyder's Justice League is going to be Autumn's legacy? Because Autumn was so connected to why he left, understandably why he left, but it's also the reason why we supported him and the American Suicide Prevention,
sure,
as well.
I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say it's going to be part of her legacy. I don't know enough about her, and I don't know what she would have wanted to have accomplished. What I hope that the release of the movie is able to do for Zack is provide some closure.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is still an open chapter in his life right now. Like, for whatever reason, I think I have no intention of putting words in his mouth, but I believe he thinks that this is unfinished business for him, you know, and I know that he thrives on the support that he has received and that this cut has specifically received. And he said to me on the set of Army of the Dead that he would never sort of encourage them to slow down or diminish their enthusiasm for the cut, because he feels that would take away from all that they've accomplished up to this point, you know. So I think the release, however it's received, and you know, like I think the critical reaction to it is insignificant at this point. I think just him being able to say that he got it out is closure. And you know how important closure can be emotionally, creatively. Like you can almost say, okay, great, now that chapter of the book is closed and I can move on to whatever the next thing will be. If it's DC related, if it's just anything else that he wants to do, he's earned that right.
Yeah. I don't know if you talked to her, but do you think because I think the most important person to talk to would be Deborah, because she had to be there to be handling the press for the theatrical cut, whilst knowing it's not her husband's actual work.
Yeah, that's hard.
But now she's she's part of the celebration of this movie, this miniseries getting released now. I think that's I find that the most interesting. Would find that the most interesting point of view with Deborah.
I didn't get Debbie for the book, and I would have loved to have had her point of view. And you're right, like her perspective on this entire journey has to be really fascinating. She's involved heavily as a producer, obviously, but that's her husband, and they live and breathe this stuff. How much did they discuss it when they're at home over the breakfast table, of just bouncing ideas off of each other, or for the longest time playing the what if game, like what if we are able to bring this back, to bring it back to life somehow, what would I finish? Like I've long held, although I have not been able to confirm this, and if I get a chance to talk to him, I definitely want to go into more detail on this with Zach, but I wonder how much he tinkered on the cut in the 3-year downtime. Like, did he have access to it? If you're ever working on anything creatively, it's never really off your plate, right? You're constantly pulling it back off, you're shaping it, you're moving it around. And I wonder how much he played with the cut, or just like left it alone, didn't touch it until he was told, like, yes, you're gonna be able to do it. But I would love to know. I would love to, because I think he knows plenty of people in the industry that he was probably like, hey, I want to see what this special effect looks like. Can you just mess with this for a little bit and tell me if it's gonna work, kind of thing. I think I kind of relate to how his brain works, and I would bet money that he tinkered with it during the whole off time and probably bounced ideas off of Debbie. Look at that beautiful studio he's got in his home. I'm sure he had it threaded up in his projector and was playing certain scenes back and forth and saying to Debbie, like, God, could you imagine if we could just show them this scene? Like he's so in tune with his fans and that fan base. I'm sure it was. So for that reason alone, again, I'm glad he's going to get a chance to take a victory lap and have some closure with that.
You were saying about, you didn't, when writing the book, you didn't know it was going to happen. Were you watching that Vero live stream with your, with a pen and paper ready to write a closing chapter or a chapter in that book, in your book as well?
That was the longest screening of Man of Steel I have ever sat through in my entire life. If that movie felt like it was 8 hours long, and even immediately after, he started to do a traditional Q&A before Henry showed up, right? And in the back of my mind, I was still thinking like, oh man, it's not going to happen. This is just a traditional screening and Q&A, And then Henry showed up. And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. And in that moment, I kind of thought more members of the league would show up. I kind of thought like each of them would sort of pop up at one point or another. And I did talk to him after the fact. I think you might have read that point where he said like he thought it was important that he started this journey with Henry, and he should be there when he continues it. But I didn't realize how fully invested I was truly in the conclusion of the journey until the live stream ended. And I was sitting right here in this chair, as we're doing right now. and I stood up and I just screamed. Like I just let out a scream that felt cathartic, you know? It was just like, holy shit, it's actually happening, you know? Like you speculated forever about, you know, are we ever going to actually see the cut? And it wasn't for anything for me personally. I was thrilled for the fans that I knew had spent that much time fighting for it, you know? Like I couldn't believe for their sake that they just got to see Zack Snyder reveal that his cut of Justice League was coming. That day, I'll never forget that day.
And you said you were able to kill two birds with one stone when you met Zack on Army of the Dead.
Yeah.
Do you think because I can understand how hard it is to get contacts and trying to actually schedule something, and especially if you have a deadline for a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that interview with Zack would have happened if it wasn't for that chance of, hey, do you want to come and see what my next movie is?
No, I don't. I really don't. And so much of the timing of this situation has been ridiculously crazy. And I can say, I've told this story on my own podcast, which is like, I know Zack's publicist. She represents several other actors and talent directors who we have had on the show and who I've worked with, you know, at Cinema Blend. She was the one who invited me to the set of Justice League back in 2016. We just have a working relationship. And she and I had been communicating throughout the entire process of just like, because the minute I knew I was going to write a book about the Snyder Cut, I was like, well, I'm going to need Zack, you know. And so once I sold the book and I knew it was a done deal, I was like, okay, cool, I need Zack. And she was very polite, but the whole time she was just like, first off, she was like, I'll bring it to him. And then she was like, he can't talk, like the whole time through. And I just didn't know if like it was NDAs or if he was negotiating with the people behind the scenes and he just didn't want to say anything on record that he couldn't say. And I saw her in March live in New York City when we were doing a different press junket. And I said to her, because this was like the final, I needed in March because I had to deliver the book in June. I needed to know in March whether I was going to get him or not get him, because I needed to write the book in a specific way, whether I was going to have his input or not have his input. And in March, I said to her, hey, am I going to get him? And she was like, nah, I don't think so. So I was like, okay, cool. Like, that's fine. I can still, now I got to make the book work without his input kind of thing. But then I got invited to the set of Army. Well, no, I had been invited to the set of Army beforehand. So I knew he was aware. To her credit, the minute that the cut got announced, the next day she emailed me and she was like, okay, now he can talk. And I was like, thank God. But it's because I was persistent and on her radar, you know, over the course of this entire time. But I know putting in FaceTime on Army of the Dead at least said to him like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. You know, like the timing of it all has been ridiculous. And I said this on a recent podcast and I didn't think about it until this happened. That was a Netflix set visit. And I know this is irrelevant to most people, but it's significant to me. Netflix has not done a set visit for any of their films so far. Like we get invited to set visits, or back before COVID, from all these studios, right? Like studios are consistently having set visits. Netflix, for whatever reason, has not done one. So that was the first time I've been invited to a Netflix set. And I have not been invited to a Netflix set since then. So the only Netflix movie that I've been invited to go to the set for is Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead, to which I was invited during a time when I was about to sit down and write a Zack Snyder book. So there are forces at play that I will never comprehend, but in some way I'm along for the ride kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that you were able to sit and have a chat with him. And I suppose it was good for him to talk about it as well when on set. And speaking of which, on set of Army of the Dead, what do you think his future is now? Because he said in a recent interview that basically once Justice League is done, he's done with DC. I don't believe that. I think there's always money involved and whatever. But where do you see Zack going now?
It's hard because he has said during one of those recent holiday streams that like he never envisioned himself as being like the DC filmmaker kind of thing, right? Like, yes, he made Watchmen, and you know that was more of like an Alan Moore type thing. And yes, he committed to Man of Steel, but he committed to Man of Steel, you know, back in like 2010. You know, it was around the time that Nolan kind of hired him for it. So I don't think he anticipated that that was going to be so integral to his career and his life for this amount of time. You know, it's funny the way things play out. I said earlier that I think Zach has earned the right to go do whatever he wants to do, and I'm sure he has plenty of other projects that he wants to explore. I don't think it's unfair to say like go out, go make the Fountainhead that you want to do, go make that war photography, you know, picture that you've been discussing. Like he's a creative guy and he has the ability to flex a lot of muscles, and I want him to be able to go and tell whatever stories he wants to tell. If the movie or the 4-hour series or however we're defining it does extremely well, I think very similar to what happened with Wonder Woman 1984, you know, like 2 days later they greenlit Wonder Woman 3. If the Snyder Cut pulls in a ton of numbers, I fully expect HBO to turn around and say to him, like, what do you want to do next in this world, and how do we make it happen? And then he'll have plenty of leverage. You know, he'll have the leverage to continue in whatever way he wants to do. But I don't know. I don't know if he'll be so quick to dive back into DC. I think he has a lot of other ideas. Unless working on this has truly, like, it's a little bit strange that because he didn't anticipate the Snyder Cut is kind of overshadowing Army of the Dead in a big way this year, because, you know, he puts out a tweet that's like, hey, Army of the Dead's coming out this year, and all of us are like, Snyder Cut. And I get it, you know, but like he's probably really excited for Army too, and wants that to do well, and that looks like an exciting project. So I don't know, man. I just think he's gonna have a lot more options than he ever dreamed possible, and I think that's exciting.
As I've said to you many times, and I've even tweeted about this, I want him to do Bond. A lot of Bond fans would go mental because they don't see how he would fit. But I think as a filmmaker, he would literally be incredible.
With Henry, wasn't Henry rumored for Bond for a while?
He was second place to Daniel Craig.
Okay.
But I think he would do. I think if he was going to do Bond, it would be with Henry.
Bond would be phenomenal.
If he was the person to go, he was going to do the next, you know, start off the series, it would be Henry.
Mm-hmm.
I think he would work. I think he would work well with anyone.
Bond would be phenomenal. I think that he wants to do something Star Warsy. You know, like he's such a fanatic, and there's so many new things to do in Star Wars with the Disney Plus series, and you see Patty jump over to go do, you know, a Rogue Squadron type thing that, like, I would want to see Zack Snyder's version of a Star Wars movie. But you talk about studio oversight. Geez, I mean, Lucasfilm's got nothing on what Warner Brothers does. They control their films, so I wonder if Zack would be a good fit over there.
I also think he'd become a mini-series director. He can tell those longer, because you know, even with the Ultimate Edition of BBS, it's 3 hours. You can cut that. You know, if you did that an hour, that's free. You know, it's a 3-part series.
It's a big part of the reason why I'm really fascinated to see how this is structured out.
Yeah.
Because even watching like things like Mandalorian and currently watching the first couple episodes of WandaVision, like they are programs that are shaped to be episodic. Yeah. You know, it's clearly not like a 9-hour movie that they just cut in pieces. So I wonder how much Zack got a chance to think about the conclusion of an episode, you know, and how it sort of feeds you into the next one, sort of thing, when he didn't have the flexibility to bring his entire cast back and shoot. You know, he had to work with the material that he had in his hands. So we will see, and hopefully soon.
Finally, if you get the chance, if you know, when this book becomes successful within the fan base and everyone's talking about how wonderful it is, will you go to HBO Max and say, I want to do a docu-series on this as well?
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I can't see why, because it's as you said, it's such a fascinating story. I don't know if Warner Brothers or Warner Media want the negativity at first, but you can say, well, it ended beautifully.
Yeah. I mean, I would never say no to anything. One of the it's funny when I mentioned earlier that Zach was saying no, he couldn't talk, no, he couldn't talk for the longest time. That one of the reasons why, in the back of my mind, because you overthink constantly when you're being told no, like, okay, but why no? I thought maybe he had something planned, that he was going to come out with a here's my journey on the Snyder Cut. And he's so visual that honestly I would never want to take the opportunity away from him to do that. Like, if this is what I accomplished with it, cool. I got the story written. I'm a writer. I documented it in that way. If Warner Brothers, or HBO Max asked me to head up something like that, I mean, it would be a dream come true. But I would like Zach to have the ability to do that, because I think that he would have some tremendous behind the scenes type stuff to include. Like, that would be the making of all making ofs, like the ultimate DVD featurette. So I kind of want to see his version of that.
Well, that's all I've got. That's all the questions I've got.
Sean, thank you so much for your time, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a joy. It really has. Thank you again, Sean, for taking the time to chat with me about your fantastic book. Once again, if you're interested in getting the book, a link will be in the description below. Also, check out the Bear Cave and mine and Sean's Twitter, also in the description box. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.